And Peter, there's a big opportunity here for Donald Trump, considering that his toughest words yet, though, are for election workers. It seems to me, to all of us in recent days, that he's going where his own advisors don't want him to go. Is he rattled?
Yeah, he's talking about the last election again, and he's talking about whether this one will be fair. You talk about whether this will be fair if you think you might lose in order to come up with an excuse for why you lost, right? Because that's what he did last time, and it's what he's done every time. That's his history throughout his time in politics and even before politics. Every time Donald Trump has lost any kind of contest, he has accused somebody of rigging it. And that's not just in politics. That even when he was on TV, when the Apprentice didn't win the Emmy, he said it was a rigged process against him. So he's laying the groundwork for a potential loss rather than talking about the issues that many Americans want to hear about, which of course would include issues that are favorable to him, like immigration and inflation, issues where he is strong, according to polls. His advisors would rather he talk about that, talk about why Harris is not qualified to be president, in his view, rather than setting up, excuses for why he might not win.
And Kim, let's talk about Harris, because Democrats were so enthusiastic about the upswing in contributions, the volunteers, all after the DNC. But what we're seeing now in this poll is that it was largely people relieved, Democrats in her base, relieved that Biden was no longer the candidate, but they're not, people, the independents, the swing voters that she needs in this really tight race are not coming to Harris yet. They don't know. 28% don't know what she stands for.
Yes, that's true. I mean, she's only been in the race for just about a month and a half now, not even. But there's only 2 months left until Election Day. And so there is still time, and that what she will need to do at the debate and beyond is to introduce herself to people and to let them see her, make her case for herself, to define herself, as opposed to allowing someone else to be defined. And she's doing a good job of that so far. Yes, the fundraiser is important because that has allowed her to open field offices across the country, including in places where other candidates, including other Democratic candidates, had not done so before. So you can tell that the campaign is taking that seriously. But I will say one thing about that poll as to Donald Trump being the candidate who represents change more than Harris does. It's currently a good economy. People are doing better than they were under the Trump administration. So that's not necessarily a bad number for Harris, but she does have work to do to introduce herself.
Yeah, but Kim, let's follow up on that, because in terms of the economy, she's still not given as much credit for that as Donald Trump is on the economy. And despite what we saw were the non-factual responses that he gave at the Economic Club, for instance, and in other economic speeches, he's not giving specifics on what he would do and on how these tariffs would work. And he's not acknowledging that those tariffs would raise money, but it would be by raising money as a consumer tax on Americans. Yet people are not responding to the improvement on inflation. It's, maybe the rate cut that we're expecting from the Fed will change that, but time is running out.
It is running out. I mean, frankly, Andrea wasn't even speaking in complete sentences at that forum on the economy and how tariffs had anything to do with childcare. But that's why this debate is important. Look, a lot of people who are not hardcore Democrats may not have watched the DNC and seen what Kamala Harris and those supporting her said about her. That is why this debate, which I suspect will probably be the most watched in history since the last one, is so important for her to make out that case herself and distinguish herself from Donald Trump. And I know a lot of Americans aren't feeling the strength of the economy, but they do remember just 4 or 5 years ago when it was in a very different place. And economists were forecasting that we would be in a recession by now due to Donald Trump's policy. That's the case that she has to make out on that and other issues.
And Peter, Harris did do another interview. This is with Ricky Smiley on the Smiley Morning Show. And this is how she handled some of the questions. I want to ask you about it on the other side, given the New York Times poll.
He plays from this really old and tired playbook, right? Where there's no floor for him in terms of how low he will go. And we should be prepared for that. We should be prepared for the fact that he is not burdened by telling the truth. and we should be prepared for the fact that he is probably going to speak a lot of untruth.
So how do you see these two sides? You know both of these candidates so well. Does she go after him under these debate rules? Can she go after them where the moderators ask the questions? They're not allowed to question each other except under apparently unusual circumstances. How does she fact check him? How much does she do? We're told that the moderators may not be, or they may be limiting their fact checking. How do you see this playing out? Is this the biggest chance to try to pin him down on policies?
Yeah, I think, look, she is, you know, she's a prosecutor at heart. That's both her career path and how she sees herself. And she made a mark when she was in the Senate briefly before becoming vice president for her very prosecutorial interrogation style at hearings of witnesses who she was trying to draw out and trying to, pin down. So I think you should expect to see her style in that vein. Now, you know, does she want to fact check everything he says? You could get lost in a blizzard of no, that isn't right, and it may not be the best way to handle it. I would imagine her advisors would tell her that she should find a way to dismiss his credibility, to make clear that she thinks most of what he says is not true, without having to individually pick at each and every statement, because it might just look nitpicky. But she has to convey the idea that what he's saying should not be trusted in a broad and perhaps even funny way. You know, humor is a real tactic here. He doesn't generally play with humor, and Biden really doesn't on the debate stage either. She has a little bit more, history, I think, with that. One last point on Kimberly's point about change. I agree that while the no change number is usually very meaningful in an election, I think this year it's a little awkward in the sense that a lot of Democrats would agree that Trump does represent change. It's just change that they don't want, right? That it would be Project 2025 change, where he upends the system and gathers power to himself, and that's change that they don't want to see. So unless you break down what people mean by change, I'm not sure how much that question tells us.